Okay, thank you, Les Carla. Okay, thank you, Les Carla. Obviously, I think it's an excellent motion. Wouldn't have put my name to it otherwise, and there's been a lot of very interesting things said. This is what I have to say about it. There's no doubting that there have been many improvements in our approach to the issue of mental health over the last half century or so. An elderly relative of mine has regularly informed me, actually I was shocked when I heard it first, that in the 1950s they witnessed a man with mental illness being loaded onto a boat to be sent to Liverpool in what in effect was a cage. I've also heard stories of how in the 1940s people with mental illness were housed on straw in some mental hospitals and hosed down in a communal fashion in order to wash them. One could only conclude that if you were not suffering from a mental illness before you went into a mental institute in those cases, then you certainly would be afterwards. The town that I come from had up until the mid-90s a mental hospital called St. Pat's. It was the last place on the planet that anyone would have wanted to end up in. In fact, it was used as a threat and a term of abuse to suggest that one might, as they say, end up there. In 1988, a few years before it closed, my father was given the contract by the health board to replace the wooden steps on one of the stairwells. I was given the job by my father of the gopher. At 16, I finally got to see what was behind the walls of St. Pat's. While not being anywhere near as bad as what I heard from the 40s, it was nonetheless bleak. I always remember one particular striking thing, and that was of men and women leaning against a wall and rocking back and over for hours on end. It was so bleak that when my father had finished the job, it left an indelible mark on me to this day. As a result, my biggest fear of suffering from a mental illness would not be the illness itself, but the actual fear of having to engage with the services. The hospital appeared to be arranged along the lines of the higher up the floors you were, then the more ill you were classified as. The hospital was closed in 1996, whereupon many of the residents were moved out into the community and others were not suitable, were placed in other institutions such as Ballinasloe. And actually, when they tried to move people out to the community, including some of my own neighbours, they objected to it because they were scared of them. But actually, not anymore, fortunately. The hospital itself was replaced with a prison. I was under protest an inmate of that prison on 2 occasions for a short time. While the name of the institution had changed, a lot had remained the same. The place was as bleak as ever, in fact, slightly more so. On many occasions, I came across people who were obviously mentally ill. In fact, I met one man who was leaning against a wall and rocking back and over in a manic fashion, similar to what I had seen in the same building when it was a mental hospital. The question is, when the state decided to close hospitals, did it make enough resources available for the people who were formerly housed at the institution? A report done by the Irish Journal of Psychological Medicine found that 60% of female and 35% of males have suffered some form of psychological illness. So even though we had officially moved away from a particular type of institution for treating people with mental illness, many have just ended up being treated in the same way as always, except for now we call them criminals. One of the main reasons why I feared mental illness so much is because at a very young age, I myself suffered from depression. I spent evenings when I was younger, well, all I was capable of doing was staring at fire for hours at end. At the time, it was considered preposterous to a great many people that one could suffer from depression as a young person. In fact, I always remember a nun in my school saying, "What are you on about? Don't be daft," the irony of it all. Another fear I had of the institutions was that I had heard that they put people in there for being different. Now, as a child and to this very day, I could justifiably be described as an eccentric, so this added to my fears. It wasn't until I was 23 years of age did I try and deal with my mental health issues. I went into my GP in Galway and told the doctor in question how I was finding life such a struggle. I told the doctor that I had motivational problems. By the way, I wasn't smoking cannabis at the time. And that no matter what I did, I found life a struggle. I'd even contemplated suicide. And to be quite honest with you, and Claire laughed at me earlier when I said it, the only reason I didn't commit suicide was I didn't have the motivation to do it. Now that is bad. The doctor in question, unfortunately, knew nothing about me. They never asked me about my diet. They never asked me did I do any exercise. They never asked me how I spent my days. In fact, all he asked me was, did I want to take Prozac? I was given a prescription and told to come back in a couple of weeks. Fortunately for me, I never took the tablets. I'm not saying that's the answer, but for me it was. However, the idea that I would have to take a tablet inspired me to find another solution. I immediately took up exercise by running 5 miles per day and changed to a diet which meant that I was getting everything that was essential to a body working well. As the saying goes, a healthy body leads to a healthy mind. That has certainly been the case for me. From listening to some people in the mental health profession, one would think that all of this has changed since I went looking for help in the mid-90s. However, from talking to people in my constituency clinic over the past 8 years, it is quite clear that people are still being offered tablets as a first rather than a last resort. I do not know how many times I've heard people being given tranquilizers in order to deal with grief. How could one grieve if you're up to your eyeballs in drugs? Surely it should be normal to be hysterical after losing a loved one. Ultimately, prevention is better than cure from an economic point of view. It is also infinitely cheaper. An individual can only do so much to prevent mental illness. There also rests a responsibility with the state and society. We must develop a society which does not treat people like a cog in an economic machine. We must always look at ways where the inevitable stress of life can be minimised. However, at the moment we are actually going in the opposite direction. Bullying has become an acceptable way to progress in life. This should come as no surprise, as the very idea of capitalism is based on the survival of the fittest, in other words, the crushing of the weak. One of the most popular shows on television at the moment is The X Factor. This show is based on demeaning people. It deliberately sets out to expose in the most public way possible people's imperfections, upon which a crowd of people savage you by booing you. Then you have The Apprentice with Bill Cullen, the entrepreneur, as he keeps calling himself, where bullying is just par for the course. And the person who can put up with his bullying the best ends up getting the job. We have the same thing on The Dragon's Den, where people's ideas are trashed, and the more demeaning the dragon is, the better. Imagine if this went on in the schoolyard. Well, it wouldn't. They wouldn't allow it. However, it is inevitable that this philosophy on life will be taken up by children in the playground, as well as by budding entrepreneurs who see this as the only way to succeed. If such a philosophy is allowed to pervade, then it is inevitable that we will live in a more stressful society, and as a result end up with massive mental health problems as a result.
Just 2 minutes left.
Obsession with body image is something which is causing a massive amount of problems in mental health. This was something which was particular to women, but is now spreading to men. I pity any young woman who has to live in this environment, where if you're not a size 0, then you are a failure. Magazines such as Heat, etc., are, in my opinion, exceptionally damaging to the mental health of this generation. You can see close-up of women's legs taken by low-life paparazzi that are done in some way to highlight cellulite. Now remember, cellulite is bad. It is the modern symbol of failure, unlike in the past where it was a sign that you weren't afraid to eat your dinner. This inevitably leads to insecurities in women, which makes them feel somewhat inferior. In many, it leads to cases of mental health illness. There's also the issue of financial stress, which I won't get a chance to talk about. Our latest end-of-pipe solution to dealing with mental health issues in Ireland is Vision for Change. This document, which was first published in 2006, its goal was to make the mental health services in Ireland person-centred, recovery-orientated, holistic, community-based, multidisciplinary and population-based. These are laudable goals, but all of these require extra resources. When the document was first published, it was stated that 2,000 extra staff will be needed to be employed in order for the strategy to be implemented. This has not happened. Instead, the health service has taken thousands of new administrative staff on. Not only has there not been extra staff provided, we now see a situation whereby staff are being let go and not replaced. In fact, locally, in County Roscommon, I'm told that as much as 1/3 of the staff will have left the service by next March in comparison to last March. I finish up by saying I have heard Minister Lynch talk about this issue, and she appears to speak with genuine compassion and concern. The ball is now in her court. We need to treat the issue of mental illness seriously. We need to treat it with the urgency that one treats a cancer patient or someone with a heart problem. By the end of her term, we need to see a situation where one can genuinely open up about mental issues without feeling shame, or more importantly, without being made feel shame. As things stand, that is not the case. So I say this now, and I mean this more than I've ever said anything in here. Please, please, please do something about this. Now, the technical group have decided that we don't believe there is a need to vote on this motion in order that we can depoliticise the issue. It is way too important of an issue to be made a political football of. The only thing that needs a kicking here is our old attitudes to mental illness. Thank you.
Deputy.